This is an SOL review of modern America, Presidents Reagan all the way up to the election of Obama. Reagan is elected in 1980. There's this conservative revolution, the new right, they call it. The 60s and 70s, there's a lot of democratic acts, a lot of liberal ideas come through the Supreme Court. Culturally, it's a very liberal time. So when we get to the 1980s, there's sort of this swing back to the right, where people are interested in a more conservative government. At this point, the largest demographic group in the United States is the elderly, and the elderly tend to vote conservatively. They're less interested in things like legal abortion and legal drugs and, counterculture movements. Reagan is elected. He's very charming. The American people seem to really like him. He promises tax cuts. He ends up cutting taxes for the upper income. The only people that really benefited from this instantly were upper incomers and young urban professionals or yuppies. The idea is it's supposed to trickle down to the middle class and lower classes, and the economy is supposed to improve as a result. They often call this Reaganomics, trickle-down economics, or supply-side economics. Also, as a conservative, Reagan appoints justices to the Supreme Court who will exercise judicial restraint. So justices who would not, say, do what happened in the 1970s and approve legal abortion. Judicial restraint also means, however, that justices are not going to overturn previous court rulings. So conservatives seem to be a little bit annoyed with the Supreme Court not overturning previous decisions. But if you're conservative, you're not going to change what already exists. George H.W. Bush is president after Reagan serves 2 terms. George H.W. Bush was Reagan's vice president. When Bush is elected, he says he's going to be the education president. He also says he's not going to create any new taxes. Unfortunately, Bush does create new taxes, and this really hurts him when he tries to run for re-election. When Bush is president, the Soviet Union collapsed. Yugoslavia also collapses. Germany then reunifies. And it's in the early 90s that Iraq dictator Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. Kuwait had about 20% of the oil that the United States wanted. Well, they had about 20% of the oil in the Middle East. So the United States sends troops in first in Desert Shield to protect Kuwait, then in Desert Storm. Desert Storm is also known as the Persian Gulf War. This is the first time that American women serve in combat. George H.W. Bush does not get reelected, and instead America elects Bill Clinton, governor of Arkansas. He is a centrist Democrat. That means he's not a very liberal Democrat, and he's not a conservative Republican. He's very moderate in his political views, so a lot of Americans really find him attractive as a political candidate. He's also the first baby boomer to run for president, so that gets him a lot of votes too. He's president when NAFTA is created, free trade between Canada and Mexico. Clinton also will have a lot of scandal during his presidency, like Whitewater and the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Eventually, Clinton will actually be impeached, but he is acquitted, so he will remain president. He serves 2 terms until the election of 2000 between George W. Bush and Al Gore. This election is incredibly close. Eventually, the Supreme Court decides it in favor of George W. Bush. When George W. Bush is president, terrorists attack on 9/11. The Twin Towers are hit, the Pentagon is hit, and that other plane crashes in Pennsylvania that might have been directed for Washington, D.C. So George W. Bush amps up this war on terror. He goes into Afghanistan, sends troops into Afghanistan trying to find al-Qaeda, who's responsible for the terrorist attacks on the United States. He also sends troops into Iraq during his presidency because Iraq was suspected of having weapons of mass destruction. The United States responds to terrorism by creating things like the Department of Homeland Security and the Patriot Act. All of these things make the new hot topic the idea of people's right to privacy. Is it okay for the government to wiretap and place video cameras on street corners if that's an invasion of people's privacy but still protects them? So it brings us back to that whole debate. Does the government exist to keep you free, or does the government exist to keep you safe? Reagan is such a popular president that often some people refer to his presidency and the time after that as the Reagan Revolution. And these are some of the things that some will attribute to the Reagan Revolution: the election of Republicans in the future, and the idea that Clinton's election is because of Reagan, because Clinton is a centrist or a very conservative Democrat. The government is responsible for promoting economic health. The Federal Reserve regulates interest rates. The president can create jobs by creating laws. So can Congress. They can sign off or veto laws. They can regulate taxes. Some of the laws that they create can give people jobs. The U.S. Supreme Court during this time is responsible for protecting individual rights. In modern America, we see the first woman on the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor. We also see other minorities like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is Jewish, and Clarence Thomas, an African American. Remember, Thurgood Marshall was an African American too, the first African American on the Supreme Court justice. Civil rights movement is responsible for a lot of this. And so now the hot topic, like I said, is the right to privacy.